Okay, so today we're talking about a method other than factoring and graphing for whenever factoring and graphing don't work. So make sure you get your date, page number, learning target all down. Put it in your table of contents so you can keep up with what you have. So we use synthetic division again when factoring and graphing doesn't work. So for example, if I asked you to solve this question, you would check factoring first and see, is it in standard form? Is there a GCF, which there's not? And then because there's 4 terms, you would try to factor it by grouping. So when I tried to factor this by grouping, the GCF in the first set would be x squared. And then I'd be left with x plus 2. And then in the second group, the GCF would be negative 3. And when I factored that out, I would be left with positive 2x plus 3. And then these wouldn't match. So that tells me that it doesn't factor by grouping. Remember that this tells me at most how many answers I should have. So I should have about 3 solutions. And it tells me that one of the factors is x plus 3. So it tells me that as I break it down, I'm going to have x plus 3 and then something else here equals 0. But it doesn't factor by grouping, so that's not a way to do it. I would have to figure out what this is by using another method. So another method to doing that is called synthetic division. So in order to do synthetic division, you have to first know one of the solutions. So you have to know a solution. And because they gave me that x plus 3 is a factor, then I know that I could set that equal to 0. When I set it equal to 0, I would solve for x. So I know that one of my solutions is x equals negative 3. So when I'm listing all my answers up here, x equals negative 3, that's one of the 3 answers. And I know that that's a real and rational answer. Okay, so to find my other stuff when I'm doing synthetic division, I'm going to take my one solution, negative 3, and that goes on the outside. And then here is where I'm going to put all the coefficients. Of my function. So like this one's coefficient is 1. This one's coefficient is positive 2. This one's coefficient is negative 6. And this one's coefficient is negative 9. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm dividing. Okay, and what factoring is breaking it down to smaller pieces, which is technically division. So this is just another way to divide something. And this way works every time. You don't have to factor if you can do synthetic division, if you know one of the factors. So, when I go about factoring this, or dividing this, I'm sorry, the first one always comes straight down. So I just get 1. And then the next step is to multiply. So I'm going to multiply what I got here, 1, to negative 3, and that goes there. And just like with long division that you did in elementary school, once you multiply those, you would add these. That gives me negative 1. And then I'm going to multiply again. Negative 1 times my solution, negative 3, is positive 3. And then I would add these. Negative 6 plus 3 is negative 3. And then I would multiply again and get positive 9, and then add these. And my answer, if it factors evenly, should be 0. So it should be 0. It shouldn't have a remainder. So one of my factors they already told me was x plus 3. The other factor comes from this. So I already took an x out for the x plus 3. So this one would be 1 exponent less. So this would be x squared minus 1x minus 3. So you take 1 exponent less. So instead of being an x to the third, this one would be an x squared. That would be a negative 1x, and that would be a negative 3. So then it's equal to 0, as it should be. This needs to be a 0. And I already set that equal to 0 to get negative 3. Now I need to set this one equal to 0. So when I look at this, x squared minus 1x minus 3 equals 0, first I would check and see, can I use the factor x? And I can't, because it doesn't factor to equal. Like nothing will multiply to give me negative 3 and add to give me negative 1. So I need to do the quadratic formula. So I would do x is equal to opposite b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And then 1 plus 12 is 13. I can't break down 13, so I end up just done here because 13 doesn't break down anymore. So one of my answers is 1 plus square root of 13 over 2. The other one is 1 minus square root of 13 over 2. And so I had one real rational because that was whole. These are real because there's not an I in them, so I had 2 real irrational and no imaginary because I didn't have any I's. So try one more. Again, this one won't factor by grouping. I'll go ahead and tell you, but I would check that first. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. Doesn't have a GCF, so I would have to factor by grouping, and I can't. When I go to factor by grouping, I won't get a match. So now this time they told me one of the solutions was negative 3 because they said when I plugged in negative 3 for x, I got 0. So they told me that my solution was negative 3 this time. It's not always going to be negative 3, by the way. So my one solution goes on the outside, negative 3. And then remember my coefficients go up here. So it's 2, 11, 18, and 9. And they have to all be in standard form before I can do this. And there can't be a gap. So like this needs to be cubed, squared, 1, and constant. If it was missing like this term and there was just a plus 9 here, I would have to put a 0 in 18 spot. So again, you bring the first one down. I get 2, multiply those. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6, and then I would add. That gives me 5. Multiply those, and I get negative 15. And then I would add. I get 3. Negative 3 times 3 is negative 9. That should give me 0, and it did. Therefore, one of my factors was x minus 3, or I'm sorry, x plus 3. One of my factors had to be x plus 3 because x equals negative 3. They already told me that x is equal to negative 3 by telling me this. So that means one of my factors is the opposite, x plus 3. And then the other factor would be 2 as my leading coefficient, and instead of x to the third, it's 1 less, so it's x squared. And then I have a plus 5x, I got the 5 from here, plus 3. It's positive. And that should be equal to 0. So when I set this equal to 0, I get the negative 3 that I already had. So now I'm going to focus here. I need to first check and see if I can factor it. It's got 1, 2, 3 terms. So I can either use the factor x or slide and divide. In this case, I would have to slide and divide because there's a 2 here. So let's try slide and divide. Or you could go straight into the quadratic formula. If this is to the second power, you can use the quadratic formula every time if you want. So I get x squared plus 5x plus 6. Let's see if that factors. And it does. And then I need to divide, so don't forget the divide part. So these are all my factors. This is the whole thing broken down completely. So now I need to set each of them equal to 0. So set that one equal to 0, which again we already knew was -3. We already had that one. Set this one equal to 0. Divide by 2. So -3/2 is a solution. And then this last one, x plus 1. Okay, all of those are either whole numbers or fractions, so I have 3 real rational solutions. All right, we're going to practice it more tomorrow.